Harry, we are going down. I know it. Those words were uttered between the first officer and the captain on Avianca Flight 052 about 5 seconds before the plane crashed. Suppose during those 5 seconds that Klotz, the first officer, I imagine he was thinking to himself, why didn't I just tell him that we were out of gas? Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Toastmasters, let's talk just a tad about what Klotz was facing. You see, Klotz is a Korean, or he was a Korean, and as a Korean, the way he communicated was a little differently from the way that we communicate. For instance, in the Korean language, there are 6 levels of addressing. You have the formal deference, you have the informal deference, you have the blunt, you have the familiar, you have the intimate, and you have, of course, the plain. Those 6 levels of addressing do not disappear when you enter the aviation industry. They do not disappear when you do everything. In his youth, as Klotz grew up, those 6 levels of communication were drilled into who he was, and it became a natural part of him, inseparable from anything. So whatever else it is that Klotz had to contend with, he had to contend with how does he talk to whom? Add to that the difference in some cultures called PDI. That's Power Distance Index. You see, the Power Distance Index is measured from the point of view of the persons who have no power. And the Power Distance Index is a numerical relationship between how well the people who have no power accept the fact that power is distributed unequally. In Korea, there is a high power distance index. In Korea, combined with the levels of addressing someone, you can see how it might be difficult to figure out how to say what it is you want to say. And Korea is only one language. Many languages have other nuances. For instance, the captain of the airplane was a Colombian, and in Colombia they have a low power distance index. In America, there's a low power distance index. In America, while speaking English is what I'm referring to, we don't care who you are. We say what we have to say. And if you don't like it, well, that's just tough. Because in America, we're not going to go through the difficulty of trying to figure out how to tell you that your nose looks funny. We're just going to say that your nose looks funny. We're not going to try to figure out how to tell you that you're doing something wrong. We're just going to tell you that you're doing something wrong. In the cockpit of an aircraft, it's only a microcosm of what goes on in society in general. As it turns out, the exchange, Larry, we're going down. I know it. That was most probably the clearest communication between the captain and his first officer during the entire flight. Can you imagine your airplane is out of gas and you can't just say we're out of fuel? Klotz's situation was compounded by the fact that the air traffic controllers in New York Kennedy Airport, where the crash occurred, they are notorious for being rude. They are famous for the back and forth that go on. Or you might say, by the way, I'm running out of fuel, which is what Klotz said. But by saying, by the way, we're running out of fuel, he was saying something akin to being in a restaurant, saying to the waiter, may I have some water, please? And by the way, I'm choking on a bone. Well, the waiter certainly wouldn't take him serious. When Klotz was communicating through the prism, through the filter of how he was raised, the air traffic controller was not thinking to themselves, wow, I am so glad that Klotz is appropriately deferential in his speaking to us. Whereas Klotz could not help being deferential in his speaking because that's who he was. But the air traffic controllers were not thinking that he was being deferential. They didn't think he had a problem. And as a result, by the time they found out that he had a problem, it was all over. As a result of what happened to that Korean flight and other things, the airline community has decided if you are going to be in the aviation industry, you're going to speak English. And you're going to be proficient in English. By going through the courses and learning how to be proficient in English, you'll learn in no short time that there's no 6 ways to address anybody. You'll learn that nobody cares whether you're the boss or whether you are the employee. And in learning those things, you will develop the ability to communicate. I'm going to place a message in the chat to show you when this all occurred and why the airline industry decided to do what they did. But just think, if he had just said, we're out of fuel, plainly and simply, Captain, we're out of food. If he had advocated for himself just a little stronger, just a little earlier in the flight, ladies and gentlemen, I suppose that Klotz, along with the captain and the 258 passengers who perished, I suspect they'll still be with us today. I encourage you to embrace English and learn English. As you all know, we are in an environment now where we could be talking to anybody at any time. In fact, our first speaker was from Morocco. How about that? Thank you. Back to you, Madam Toastmaster.